After 3 decades of shared experiences, one might expect life to settle into a predictable rhythm, a comfortable routine built on mutual understanding, shared memories, and the reassuring certainty of growing old together. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My encounter with Eva came during one of the most turbulent chapters of my life. My wife of 7 years, Julia, had begun to drift away, not because of another man, but because of an ideology, or perhaps more accurately, a religion. My job often required extensive travel, sometimes for weeks or even months at a time. During one such absence, 2 Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on our door, and Julia, ever the gracious hostess, invited them in. When I returned home, I found her deeply immersed in their teachings. Her once familiar world had been reshaped by newfound beliefs. At first, I didn't see it as a threat. I've always been indifferent toward religion. While I wouldn't outright deny the existence of a higher power, I've never found the concept particularly compelling. The sheer scale of suffering in the world, disease, poverty, natural disasters, made it hard to reconcile with the idea of a benevolent deity. I still remember those haunting National Geographic images: emaciated children in Africa, their fragile bodies ravaged by hunger, their eyes hollow with despair. How could anyone square such suffering with divine love? I'm not here to spark a theological debate. I just want to paint a clear picture of the dynamics between Julia and me. If someone finds solace in religion, that's their choice. It's not my place to judge or interfere. Julia knew this about me. She understood my agnostic leanings. When she started her spiritual journey, I didn't object, as long as it didn't intrude on our relationship. But that's exactly what happened. Subtly at first, then more overtly, she tried to pull me into her faith. Time and again I pushed back, insisting she respect my boundaries. In response, Julia resorted to an age-old tactic: withholding intimacy. And she wasn't subtle about it. She made it painfully clear that any physical connection depended on my abandoning what she called my juvenile beliefs and embracing her worldview. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. We loved each other, didn't we? Julia enjoyed our intimate moments as much as I did, or so I thought. I assumed her actions were a temporary ploy, a passing phase. Surely, once she realized it wasn't working, things would return to normal. But the stalemate dragged on for over 3 agonizing months, and who knows how much longer it might have lasted if other issues hadn't erupted. Issues that made our bedroom disagreements seem trivial by comparison. When we first married, Julia had convinced me to invest in a complete set of Encyclopedia Britannica, along with a subscription for yearly updates. At the time, it seemed like a wise investment, a symbol of our commitment to knowledge and intellectual growth. Little did I know it would become the spark for a conflict that further strained our already fragile relationship. The encyclopedias were meant to be an investment in our future children's education. One day, after returning from a business trip, I pulled into the garage and noticed several volumes tossed into the trash. Confused and irritated, I brought them back inside and asked Julia why they'd been thrown away. "They're full of lies and misinformation," she said bluntly. "Things like evolution and the origins of man, absolute nonsense. I don't want our kids exposed to trash like that." I lost my temper then and there. Standing in front of her, I made it clear that she was not, under any circumstances, to discard our shared property without discussing it with me first. Moreover, I believed the information she dismissed was accurate, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the facts. I returned the books to their rightful place on the shelf, glaring at her as I did so. She met my gaze with a cold, defiant stare, and the rest of the day passed in icy silence. The next day, I came home from work to find the books in the trash again. Only this time pages had been ripped out and scattered across the garage floor as if deliberately left for me to find. Inside, Julia was waiting for me, arms crossed, her expression unyielding. Clearly, she was ready for a fight. If that's what she wanted, then so be it. Without a word, I walked past her into the dining room. Inside the hutch was her prized set of china, a family heirloom passed down from her great-grandmother to her mother and finally to her as a wedding gift. 3 encyclopedia volumes had been discarded, so I took out 3 place settings and smashed them on the hardwood floor. Her screams and sobs filled the room, but I didn't stop. In my mind, it was justice, an act of balance for her disregard of what mattered to me. Afterward, I moved all my belongings into one of the spare bedrooms, shutting the door on the tense silence now growing between us. If the previous night had been frosty, this night was outright glacial. For weeks afterward, the tension only deepened. Then another business trip called me away, this time for 10 days. I returned home on a Wednesday morning and decided to stop by the house to drop off my suitcase before heading into work since Julia worked as a school bus driver and wouldn't be home yet. As I walked up the driveway, the mailman arrived and handed me a small stack of envelopes. Among them was one marked "Overdue Notice" in bold red letters. The electric bill arrived and, curious, I opened it. To my surprise, we owed $114. Eva had always handled the bills since I traveled frequently, and we'd never had an issue before. Our income was more than enough to cover expenses, but something felt off. When I checked our bank statement, I saw we had plenty of funds to pay the bill. What stopped me in my tracks were several checks made out to the Jehovah's Witnesses, 3 totaling $535. My frustration grew as I dug deeper. Over the past 2 months, Eva had written additional checks, one for $460 and another for $530, all to the same organization. I was furious. Here I was, working long hours and saving diligently for our dream of owning a house, only to find my wife funneling hundreds of dollars to a religion I didn't even believe in. After finishing my paperwork at work and updating my boss, I took the rest of the day off. I went straight to the bank, closed our joint and savings accounts, and opened new ones in my name alone. Next, I paid the overdue bill at the power company and returned home to wait for Eva. When she walked through the door, I laid everything out: the overdue bill, the checks to the witnesses, and the steps I had taken. From that moment on, I told her I would handle all the bill payments. Eva could use her earnings from driving the school bus for personal spending or donations to her religion, but she would no longer have access to our joint finances. This hit her hard. We had always agreed that her earnings would be her mad money, something she could spend however she wanted. But now I was drawing a line and she didn't like it. Her earnings weren't substantial. She worked as a school bus driver for just 5 hours a day with long breaks during holidays, but cutting off access to our joint finances felt like a blow to her autonomy. It only deepened the divide between us. With all this context, it's easy to see why I stopped rushing home after work. Instead, I began stopping at a local bar with colleagues, unwinding with a beer or two before heading back. That's where I met Isa. She was one of the waitresses, always cheerful and quick to flash a kind smile. Isa was an attractive woman, and though she wore a wedding ring, many of the guys couldn't help but flirt with her. She never encouraged their advances, brushing them off with humor. "I don't think my husband would like that," or "You'll have to ask him if he's okay with it." I never joined in. Despite everything happening at home, I had made a vow in front of family, friends, and God to remain faithful, for better or worse, and I intended to honor it. Sometimes, if the bar was quiet, Isa would sit with me and we'd talk. Through these conversations, I learned a lot about her. She had 2 young children, a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. One night, I joked with her, "You don't even look old enough to be working here, let alone have 2 kids." She smiled modestly and replied, "I get that a lot. I'm older than I look." There was something easy and comforting about talking to Isa, something that made the weight of my situation at home feel a little lighter. A month passed. I went on another business trip, and when I returned, everything changed. My wife Eva told me she wanted a divorce. Surprisingly, I didn't feel devastated or crushed. I simply looked at her and asked, "What about your God? Didn't you stand before our friends, our family, and your God at St. Mark's Church and promise to stay with me until death do us part? Or do you believe the God who witnessed those vows is different from the one you follow now? Do you think every religion has its own version of God, and yours just doesn't care about keeping promises?" She snapped back, "What do you care? You don't believe in any of it." "This isn't about me," I replied calmly. "This is about your promises, not mine." Her expression hardened. "Whatever. If you don't care, then just agree to the divorce." I shrugged. "If that's what you want, go ahead, file the papers." I walked away, retreating to the room I had claimed as my own. The next morning, Eva was waiting for me in the kitchen. "I spoke with my church," she said curtly. "They'll only allow a divorce if it's because of infidelity." I frowned. "So, who have you been cheating on me with?" She stared at me incredulously. "I haven't cheated on you," I said firmly. "You know me better than that." "No," she said coldly. "Not anymore. But that's beside the point. If you really haven't cheated, then I can't get the divorce, and that means you're stuck." I sighed, already tired of the conversation. "Eva, I've never cheated on you, and I'm not about to start just to give you an easy way out." Her frustration bubbled over. "Why don't you just have an affair with someone? It doesn't even matter who. If it's you, the church will exile you, and since you don't care about being a member, it won't hurt you." I shook my head firmly. "No. I'm not comfortable with having a public record branding me as a cheater. Divorce records are public. You know that someday someone might see it and judge me for it. I don't want that hanging over me. Why are you fighting me on this? She exclaimed. Because, I said quietly but steadily despite the sadness in my voice, I don't want you, the you that you are now. My voice softened as I added, but I'm still hoping. My words trailed off as if searching for clarity amidst emotions too tangled up inside myself before finally declaring without wavering despite sorrow lacing every syllable spoken aloud, hoping for the woman I married to come back. Eva responded only by giving me such an icy glare it could have frozen hell itself solid before spinning sharply on her heel and storming out of the kitchen, leaving behind lingering traces of expensive perfume. A bitter reminder of the life we built together now crumbling before my eyes like sand slipping through fingers unable to hold on to anything anymore except memories fading fast away into nothingness. The bar had become my sanctuary, a temporary escape from the tension that had taken up permanent residence at home. Each night, I lingered a little longer, delaying the inevitable confrontation with Eva, hoping to avoid another pointless argument. Sa, with her warm smile and easy laughter, became a welcome distraction. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, finding solace in each other's company. As days turned into weeks, she became privy to the turmoil in my life. She listened patiently as I poured out my frustrations, offering a sympathetic ear and a non-judgmental presence. In return, she confided in me, revealing the truth behind her carefully constructed facade. I'm not actually married, she confessed one evening, a mischievous glint in her eyes. These rings, she gestured to the gold bands on her fingers, are just a deterrent, a way to keep the wolves at bay. She was a single mother juggling 2 jobs and raising 2 young children on her own. Her resilience and determination filled me with admiration, even as I questioned the wisdom of her strategy. Doesn't that affect your tips? I asked, concern lacing my voice. She laughed, a carefree sound that momentarily lifted the gloom hanging over me. It's a small price to pay for peace of mind, she replied, her smile radiating a strength that belied her struggles. Then one sunny Monday morning my world was turned upside down. Summoned to the office, I was handed a thin envelope with a curt, "You've been served." Inside were divorce papers. While the divorce itself wasn't a shock, the accompanying restraining order, demanding I stay at least 500 feet away from Eva, sent a wave of disbelief and anger crashing over me. I had never been physically abusive. I hadn't even raised my voice in anger. The accusation was as baffling as it was infuriating. As I read through the documents, my blood ran cold. Eva was accusing me of infidelity as grounds for the divorce. To add insult to injury, she demanded $500 a week in alimony. That was the final straw. I had no intention of funding her lifestyle. She was perfectly capable of finding a job and supporting herself. Retrieving my belongings from the house would require a court officer to ensure a peaceful exchange. The earliest appointment I could secure was for 5 p.m. the following day. The thought of confronting Eva about the restraining order crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. It would only escalate things and give her more ammunition against me. Instead, I took a different approach. I contacted our landlord, informing him I was no longer residing at the property and that all future rent payments should be directed to Eva. Then, with a sense of satisfaction, I canceled all the utilities, cutting off her access to the comforts I had provided. Feeling both exhausted and vindicated, I left work and headed straight to the bar, seeking solace in familiar surroundings and Sa's comforting presence. When I arrived, she was on the phone, her voice filled with panic. As she hung up, tears streamed down her face. Concerned, I approached her gently. "What's wrong?" Through choked sobs, she explained that her babysitter had called with devastating news. Her 3-year-old son had accidentally turned on the gas stove, causing a small explosion that left him with burns. She needed to get to him immediately, but her car was out of commission. A cab was on its way but would take at least half an hour to arrive. Without hesitation, I offered her a ride. "Cancel the cab," I said firmly. "I'll take you." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. Then, with a nod, she gave me directions to her apartment. The drive was short but tense as we raced against time. When we arrived, Isa rushed out of the car and into the building, fear etched on her face. I followed closely behind, ready to help however I could. Thankfully, the situation wasn't as serious as she had feared. Her son's curiosity had led him to fiddle with the stove knobs. Since the pilot light didn't ignite, gas had built up before flaring in a sudden flash. The only casualty was some singed eyebrows. There were no burns or lasting injuries. Once things settled down, Isa showed me her car, a battered 14-year-old Plymouth that had clearly seen better days. When I tried to start it, there wasn't even a faint click. A quick inspection under the hood revealed the culprit. The negative battery cable was so corroded it had snapped in half. Luckily, I had a small toolkit in my truck. I removed the damaged cable, drove to a nearby parts store for a replacement, and installed it myself. When the engine roared to life, Isa gave me a grateful smile and thanked me profusely. That's when I told her I needed to find a motel for the night. I explained my situation with Eva and how I wasn't allowed back in the house without a court-appointed officer present. To my surprise, Isa offered me a place to stay. "You can crash on the pull-out couch until you figure things out," she said warmly. "I'll even cook dinner." Her kindness caught me off guard, but I was too tired and worn down to refuse. With genuine gratitude, I accepted her offer. The next day, I left work early to meet the court-appointed officer at my house. When I rang the doorbell, Eva answered. The moment she saw me, she tried to slam the door shut, but I blocked it with my foot. "You're not supposed to be here," she hissed. "Well, surprise," she hissed back. I replied coolly, "And this gentleman with me is from the court." This version maintains emotional depth while improving flow and clarity throughout. "Let me know if further refinements are needed." Unfazed, I replied, "They say I need someone from the court present to enter the house and collect my things. Mr. Reeves here is from the court, so I'm covered." At that, the officer flashed his badge, silencing her momentarily. As I moved through the house gathering my belongings, Eva trailed behind, trying to provoke a conversation. For the most part, I ignored her, focusing on the task at hand. But eventually I snapped. "Just shut up," I said sharply. "You're the one who got that protection order, right? My understanding is that it means I'm not even supposed to talk to you. So do us both a favor and stop talking." It took nearly 2 hours to pack up my things from the house and garage. As I was heading out, Eva called after me. "Are you going to start paying me my $500 a week?" "That depends on how badly you want to stay a member of your church," I replied evenly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone defensive. "You told me that in cases of divorce due to infidelity, the cheating spouse gets exiled from your church, right? Well, here's the deal. If I have to pay you $500 a week, I'm going to countersue and claim adultery. I might still end up paying, but at least I'll have the satisfaction of seeing you kicked out of the group that's caused all this mess. Best you make up your mind and let me know by Thursday. If I don't hear from you, I'll see an attorney on Friday and file my countersuit, and I'll make sure your church gets a copy." "You couldn't prove it," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't prove your accusations either," I shot back. "But if I fight this and prove I didn't cheat, I still win." "How do you figure that?" "Simple. We'll still get divorced, but if it's not for infidelity, your church will have no choice but to kick you out anyway." I walked away, leaving her to stew. "Call me at the office by Thursday," I said over my shoulder before getting into my car. The storage unit felt like purgatory for my belongings, a temporary holding place while I navigated the wreckage of my life. That morning, leaving Isela's apartment after a restless night on her sofa bed, I felt a surge of gratitude for her kindness. "Let me take you and the kids out to dinner tonight," I offered, hoping to repay her hospitality in some small way. Later that day, on my way to her place, I impulsively stopped at a motel and booked a room. It seemed like the logical thing to do, to give her and her children some space. However, when Isa found out, she wasn't pleased. "Why waste your money on a motel when you have a perfectly good couch at my place? Free of charge?" she questioned, arms crossed and a disapproving frown on her face. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I gave in and ended up back on her couch. By Wednesday, Ava, my soon-to-be ex-wife, finally called. After a tense negotiation, we reached an agreement. I would pay her $150 a week in alimony for the next 2 years. It felt like a small price to pay for my freedom. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Isa and I took the plunge and got married. It felt like a whirlwind, a desperate grasp for stability in the midst of chaos. Fast forward 36 years, our marriage, while far from perfect, had endured. We weathered storms, navigated challenges, and found a comfortable rhythm. Even in our 60s, we still held hands, stole kisses, and enjoyed a fulfilling physical relationship. Isela's children had grown up, married, and started families of their own. While we didn't have children together due to my infertility, we found immense joy in doting on our 3 grandchildren. It was one of those grandchildren, Ruth, who inadvertently set in motion the events that would shake the foundation of our marriage. Or perhaps it wasn't Ruth's fault at all. She simply graduated from high school, an event that should have been a cause for celebration, not conflict. 2 days before Ruth's graduation, ISA asked me to attend the ceremony with her. I promised I'd try, but getting time off work on such short notice was nearly impossible. My boss predictably shot down my request. With Charlie on the Ferguson account, Dave tied up with the Floyd project, and Clara recovering from her appendectomy were stretched thin, he explained. That evening when I broke the news to ISA, her reaction was explosive. "You never do anything I ask," she snapped, her voice laced with frustration and years of pent-up resentment. "It's a simple graduation ceremony, and you can't even do that for me." Her words stung as her anger escalated into a litany of past grievances. It felt like she was rewriting our entire history, painting me as an uncooperative and uncaring husband. The injustice of it all infuriated me. I had always tried to accommodate her wishes, often at the expense of my own. When we bought our house years ago, I had poured my heart and soul, not to mention my savings, into creating the backyard of my dreams. A lush quarter-acre oasis filled with trees, vibrant flower beds, a tranquil koi pond with a cascading waterfall, and a spacious patio shaded by a charming gazebo. It was perfect, a sanctuary, until ISA decided she wanted a dog. I had vehemently opposed the idea, knowing full well what havoc even one dog could wreak on such meticulously crafted landscaping, but ISA wore me down with relentless persistence, and soon enough we had ourselves one husky, and just as feared, within 6 months flowerbeds were trampled, lawns riddled, holes once pristine, landscape reduced ruins. Then came second husky because apparently first needed companion. ISA introduced a canine agent of chaos into our home, and her next project was tearing out the carpet to install hardwood floors. I resisted, arguing that the dog's claws would inevitably scratch and damage the hardwood floors, but as usual ISA's persistence prevailed. Within a year the floors were marred with deep gouges and scratches, requiring refinishing. Less than a year later they needed it again, and 9 months after that a third time. By then the flooring company informed us further refinishing was impossible. To mask the damage, ISA bought a dozen throw rugs, effectively recreating the carpeted look she had initially rejected. Then came her dream car, a Mustang convertible. Despite my warnings about its impracticality during harsh winters, she was determined to have it. She purchased a classic 1993 Mustang convertible with a powerful engine and manual transmission. She drove it like a race car driver, until winter arrived. Predictably, she lost control on an icy road and wrecked it. Did this teach her a lesson? Not ISA. She took the insurance money and promptly bought another Mustang. Her pattern of impulsive decisions and disregard for my opinions grew increasingly frustrating. Living with ISA felt like bracing for an unpredictable storm, a force of nature I couldn't control. Her fiery spirit often eclipsed my own. Her red Mustang, a symbol of her tenacity, had been wrecked twice in treacherous weather, yet both times it roared back to life like a phoenix rising from ashes. This was just one of countless instances where her unwavering determination overshadowed my desires. If I craved the cozy ambience of Restaurant A while she preferred the bustling energy of Restaurant B, we inevitably ended up at B. Vacations followed the same pattern. If I yearned for tranquil beaches while she longed for vibrant cityscapes, we booked tickets to her choice. Even when the kids left home and I suggested downsizing from our sprawling 5-bedroom house to something more manageable for just the two of us and our pets, ISA vehemently opposed it. "We need the space for when the kids and grandkids visit," she argued with unshakable conviction. Once again I yielded. For our 25th wedding anniversary, I had meticulously saved money and vacation time for a romantic Caribbean cruise. When I surprised her with the itinerary, she spent a week trying to persuade me to use the resources for a family reunion in Marquette, Michigan, in December. A frigid Upper Peninsula reunion instead of a tropical paradise. Predictably, I gave in. And now she had the audacity to accuse me of never doing anything she wanted. The tension at home thickened over the following 2 weeks, a silent battle of wills masked by a veneer of normalcy. Then the dam broke. Work had me entangled in a demanding project requiring late nights and endless hours hunched over my computer. I always called ISA to let her know not to wait up for dinner. That Wednesday was no different. I informed her I'd be late. When I finally dragged myself home, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders, I found ISA in an unfamiliar state, utterly inebriated. Over the years, I'd seen her tipsy and jovial, but this was different. The moment I stepped through the door, she launched into her familiar tirade. "You never do anything I want." I tried to disengage, seeking refuge from the alcohol-fueled confrontation, but she pursued me relentlessly, her anger escalating with each slurred word. "It was a simple thing you could have done," she shouted, her voice raw with emotion. I'm your wife. I'm more important than your damn job. Her grievances continued as I prepared a meager sandwich for dinner, her accusations pressing down on me like a weight. I needed to escape before I said or did something I'd regret. I retreated to the bedroom we had converted into a den and home office, locking the door behind me, seeking sanctuary from the storm raging outside. But my efforts were futile. She pounded on the door, her voice battering against my fragile peace like a relentless hammer. I donned headphones and cranked up the music, desperately trying to drown out her words. Even the loudest melodies couldn't silence her anger. Then her accusations took a darker turn. She began dissecting my flaws with surgical precision, unleashing grievances she had apparently harbored for years. She recounted every perceived slight, every instance where she felt neglected or disregarded, culminating in my absence from a simple high school graduation. Her words cut deep. After nearly 4 decades together, was this how she truly saw me? The pain was immeasurable. I had sacrificed so much, given her everything I could, only to be met with bitter resentment. Half an hour later, I emerged from the den. Silence from behind the door signaled a temporary ceasefire. Essay was slumped at the kitchen table, a nearly empty bottle of vodka standing as stark testament to her turmoil. Her face was etched with exhaustion and bitterness. Remnants of the night's confrontation lingered like toxic air. I shook my head in frustration and headed straight to bed. As I began to drift off, the bedroom door burst open. Essay stormed in, yanking off the covers. Her voice was sharp, filled with venom. "Don't you dare go to sleep on me, you worthless bastard. I'm not done with you." Before I could fully process her words, Essay began hitting me on the back with her fists. The blows weren't forceful, they didn't hurt, but the sheer act pushed me past my breaking point. I stood up, grabbed her arms firmly and yelled, "Shut the hell up, Ess." She struggled, trying to push me away, but I held on. When she attempted to knee me, her drunkenness made her clumsy and slow. I twisted my body to dodge and we both lost our balance, crashing to the floor. She cursed and flailed beneath me as I pinned her down. My voice was strained with anger and exhaustion. "Shut up, Ess. If I'm so worthless, then get a lawyer and divorce me. But just shut up." Her resistance melted into sobs and I finally let go. Standing up, I left the room and retreated to a spare bedroom, locking the door behind me. My mind was in turmoil, her words cutting deep. Sleep was elusive as my thoughts raced through the pain and frustration of the night. When I woke in the morning, Isa was still asleep. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured myself a quick cup, filled a travel mug and headed to work, hoping to leave the tension behind. Little did I know that while I was at work, Isa had set events in motion that would change everything. That morning, when Isa woke up, she called our family doctor. Speaking to the nurse, she claimed she wanted me to come in for a checkup. When asked why, Isa alleged I had been acting strangely and suggested I might have dementia. She added one more lie that would seal my fate. "Last night, he bruised me pretty badly." In our state, medical personnel are legally required to report any suspicion of spousal abuse to the authorities. As soon as Isa hung up, the nurse contacted the police. About an hour later, she called Isa back to inform her that law enforcement had been notified and assured her, "The police will make sure your husband never abuses you again." When I arrived home from work that evening, unusually early, Isa was a wreck. Her face was streaked with tears, and she was visibly shaking as she confessed what she'd done. "I didn't mean for the police to get involved," she sobbed. "I just wanted to scare you." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Looking through the front window, I saw 2 police cars parked outside. 3 officers stood at the door, 2 men and 1 woman. The male officer wearing corporal stripes spoke first. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am," I replied. They explained why they were there and asked if Isa was home. I confirmed she was and invited them inside. Immediately they separated us. The female officer took Isa into the kitchen to speak privately while the 2 male officers led me out onto the patio for questioning. Outside, they explained the call from the doctor's office and asked for my account of what happened the previous night. I recounted everything, Isa storming into the room, her shouting, and how I had grabbed her arms to stop her from hitting me. Then came the question that sealed my fate. Did her blows cause you any pain? I should have kept my mouth shut, but inexperienced in these situations and wanting to explain myself, I said yes. There was pain, I admitted, but it wasn't physical, it was emotional. Her words hurt deeply, not her punches. Later, I learned the officer had simply noted yes to whether I felt pain, omitting my explanation entirely. The officers went back inside to consult with the female officer who was still speaking with Isa. After a few minutes, she returned to the patio and asked about the bruises on Sa's arms. I explained that I had grabbed her to stop her from falling and that Isa bruised easily. She often got bruises just from bumping into furniture. The officer nodded, returned inside, and within 5 minutes, the officer with corporal stripes stepped back out. His words were firm but delivered without malice. In spousal abuse cases, the law requires one party to be removed from the premises. After hearing both accounts, we've determined that you'll need to leave. As he spoke, I noticed the other 2 officers escorting Isa toward the back of one of the police cars. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. To me, this was absurd. What had happened between us didn't even remotely qualify as spousal abuse. Yet their Isa was being taken to jail. I won't dive into every detail of the chaos that followed. The court hearings, the attorney fees, the countless meetings with the court's victim advocate. It felt like an endless cycle, a system more concerned with justifying its existence than with justice. In the end, Isa spent one night in jail. After 3 months of legal wrangling and $66,000 in attorney fees, the charges were dropped. When Isa returned home, she was full of apologies, tears, and promises of change. She showered me with affection, especially in the bedroom, for months following her release and until the charges were officially dismissed. She seemed like a different person. To understand what happened next, you need to know a bit more about me. I loved Isa deeply and showed it in every way I could. I sent her flowers at work and brought them home just because. I celebrated every possible occasion with cards, candy, and gifts, anniversaries no one else would remember. Our first date, our first kiss, our first Halloween together, even the day she took her Mustang to the car wash for the first time. But most of all, I expressed my love through touch. I couldn't be near Isa without reaching out, whether walking past her or sitting across from her or lying next to her at night. After nearly 40 years together, we still held hands while walking or sitting at a restaurant. At night, we always slept snuggled close together, feeling each other's warmth, knowing we were there for one another. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time something shifted subtly between us. Something almost imperceptible at first, but growing more noticeable as days turned into weeks. I opened my eyes one morning to find her just a foot away, yet distance between us felt insurmountable. Our intimacy had dwindled. Nothing replaced excuses like, not tonight, don't feel well, have headache. Even my yeast infection when went walks kept just enough space, make holding hands awkward at restaurants. Hands stayed busy, menu remained firmly lapped, leaving no opportunity. Connection. The final straw came Saturday morning. Favorite breakfast spot. We just placed orders, reached across table, take hand, pulled away sharply. Why did do that? Asked confused. I don't want you touching me, she snapped. What do you mean by that? You know exactly what it means. You had me thrown in jail. I stared at her, stunned. I didn't have you thrown in jail. You did that to yourself when you called the doctor. That was on you. Her eyes flashed with anger. You're lying. You made them arrest me. The accusation hit me like a punch. I stood abruptly, told the waitress to cancel our order, and walked out. By the time I reached the truck and started the ignition, Isa had climbed into the passenger seat. You were just going to leave me there? She asked, incredulous. Absolutely, I replied coldly. If you don't want anything to do with me anymore, I'm giving you what you wanted. Distance. And how was I supposed to get home? Hitchhike? Walk? Call a cab? Figure it out, I said sharply. Her voice rose. Why are you acting like this? You know what? Just shut up. I don't want to hear another word from you. She started to protest, but I cut her off. You spent a night in jail, big deal. I've spent the last 5 months living in a damn freezer because of your stupid phone call. It wasn't. Stop talking, I said through gritted teeth. I swear if you don't shut up, I'll pull over and toss you out of this truck. Was I angry? Absolutely. And in that moment, I didn't care if she knew just how furious I was. For the next 5 minutes, Isa heard more curse words from me than she had in the last 30 years. She remained silent, her usual defiance replaced by a flicker of understanding. My words hung in the air like a storm cloud, sharp, resolute, and impossible to ignore. I was done. When we arrived home, I instructed Isa to meet me in the kitchen in 5 minutes. I headed to my office, retrieved some documents from a file, and returned to face her again. She was already seated at the table, her expression a mix of apprehension and defiance. I sat opposite her and placed the papers between us. This, I began, holding up the documents, is a copy of the police report from that night. After we're done here, you'll get a copy if you don't already have one. You claim I lied and got you arrested, so let's revisit the facts. I began reading aloud, my voice steady and unwavering. Officer Connor's report stated that 2 days prior, On July 28, 2015, she and her husband David engaged in a heated argument. She admitted to consuming 6 screwdrivers and being intoxicated. She expressed frustration with David, claiming he wasn't attentive enough and that she felt neglected. In an attempt to address these feelings, she woke David up while he was asleep to initiate a conversation. During the argument, she admitted her words got the better of her, and she uttered hurtful things. I continued, Officer Smithers' follow-up statements from ISA. She admitted to poking David during the argument and said it was possible she hit him, though she couldn't recall clearly due to her intoxication. She remembered waking him up and acknowledged that the argument escalated quickly. ISA also conceded that David was likely telling the truth, stating he had never lied before. I placed the papers on the table and met her gaze with unwavering determination. Based on your own admissions, the authorities concluded that you were the primary aggressor. They made their decision to arrest you accordingly. You woke me up, poked me, and may have even hit me, your words, not mine, so don't try to shift the blame onto me. I didn't call the police, I didn't press charges, I didn't lie. Your phone call to the doctor and your statements to the police are why you were arrested. I won't tolerate you twisting the narrative to paint me as the villain. Did my words, backed by undeniable evidence, change her perspective? Not in the slightest. In her mind, I remained the antagonist, and no amount of logic or proof could sway her opinion. The following weeks saw the chasm between us widen further. I moved into one of the spare bedrooms, and for the past 3 years, we've lived separate lives under the same roof, strangers sharing space but nothing more. Our interactions became limited to polite formalities. She kept her life to herself, and I did the same. The thought of divorce crossed my mind more than once, but I ultimately dismissed it. Why sacrifice my basement workshop? My 3-car garage where I lovingly restored classic cars? Or the hot tub on the deck for a cramped apartment? Despite the damage the dogs had inflicted on the backyard, which admittedly I had foreseen, I still found solace sitting on the deck watching the koi glide through the pond while sipping a cold drink and listening to the soothing sounds of the waterfall. At my age, starting over in a new relationship felt daunting, both financially and emotionally. Divorce wouldn't be a financial hardship. After selling the house, my share of the equity would come to around $200,000. Alimony wasn't a concern either, as ISA's retirement income from her state job far surpassed our combined Social Security benefits, consulting earnings, and airline pension. Yet, I doubted divorce was the answer. I was deeply attached to our spacious backyard, perfect for our 3 Siberian Huskies. Moving to an apartment or condo would mean sacrificing that space, and my beloved Mustang would likely end up relegated to a storage unit, a compromise neither of us was willing to accept easily. Street parking keeps us tethered to this shared space, 2 individuals living separate lives under one roof. It's a stark reminder that infidelity isn't the only force capable of unraveling a marriage. Sometimes it's anger left unchecked or resentment left unspoken that drives people apart until they become strangers sharing nothing but walls and memories, and even those begin to fade with time. This polished version streamlines dialogue for realism and impact while maintaining emotional depth and narrative coherence throughout each scene. Transition within this pivotal moment between characters who are struggling deeply yet unable, or unwilling, fully reconcile their differences despite clear evidence presented against accusations made against one another during heated exchanges over past events still affecting present circumstances significantly enough where neither party seems ready. Yet move forward together nor apart completely. Either way forward remains uncertain at best given current tensions unresolved between them both still lingering unresolved despite attempts made otherwise so far unsuccessfully thus far anyway. This story of a crumbling marriage offers a sobering lesson. Unresolved resentment and a failure to communicate openly can erode even the strongest bonds. David and ISA both carried valid grievances, but their inability to address these issues constructively led to a toxic cycle of blame and emotional distance. It's a cautionary tale showing how love and commitment, no matter how deep, can falter under the weight of unspoken frustrations and an unwillingness to adapt or compromise. At its heart, this story highlights the fragility of relationships, emphasizing the need for constant care, empathy, and honest dialogue to navigate life's challenges. Here are some key lessons from David and ISA's experience. 1. Open communication is vital. Misunderstandings and resentment flourish in silence. If ISA and David had been more candid about their feelings, addressing their grievances before they hardened into anger, their relationship might have been saved. Honest communication, though difficult, is the foundation of any strong partnership. 2. Respect and compromise are essential. A healthy marriage depends on mutual respect and a willingness to meet halfway. Prioritizing one partner's needs over the other's, as David did for years, fosters neglect and bitterness. Both individuals must feel valued and heard for the relationship to thrive. 3. Actions have lasting consequences. ISA's decision to involve the authorities in a moment of anger, while driven by emotion, had devastating effects on their marriage. This serves as a stark reminder to weigh the consequences of our actions, especially in heated moments. Rebuilding trust once broken is far harder than maintaining it from the start. This story acts as a mirror, reflecting the common missteps that can undermine even the most promising relationships. It's a reminder that love, while resilient, demands effort, understanding, and a commitment to grow together if it is to endure over time.